All right, here we are with 18.1, the Pythagorean Theorem. You may be familiar with this, I don't know. I think you may have covered this a little bit maybe in previous years, but if it is great, consider this a review. So the Pythagorean Theorem, this is how we relate, or the relationship of sides in a right triangle. It has to be a right triangle. Okay, we can't do this if it's not a right triangle. Okay, so your right triangle, indicated by the little corner here, you have three sides. The longest side, the one that's opposite the 90-degree angle, that's always called the hypotenuse. Okay, and then the other two are just two legs. These are legs. And it doesn't matter which one's A and which one's B, but we have a formula that says if you take one of the legs and square it, and you add it to the other leg squared, that's going to equal the hypotenuse squared. Okay, so you may have seen that before. A squared plus B squared equals C squared in a right triangle. So over here to the notes, that's what we just said. We are using the Pythagorean Theorem to find missing sides of a right triangle. Okay? Now, sides A and B, we just said this. If you look back at the figure, sides A and B, those are our legs. Okay, so sides A and B are called legs. And side C, the longest side, the one that's opposite the 90-degree angle, that is the hypotenuse. Hypotenuse. Okay? And then for any right triangle, has to be a right triangle, you can set up this formula. One side squared plus the other leg squared equals the hypotenuse squared. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. Okay, so this is how we set these up. If you notice how this one looks here, x is the hypotenuse. Okay, so it's these two legs will be squared individually and set equal to this one squared. So you'll have 8 squared plus 13 squared equals x squared. So that's 64 plus 169 equals x squared. Now I'm going to add those two together. I'm going to write my x squared first, though. X squared equals, if I add those two together, I get 233. Now, I have to square root. So x is going to equal, now normally we would say plus or minus the square root of 233 when we were solving. You remember those days when we were solving those? But what does this number represent? It represents this length, so it can't be negative, so we're not going to use the negative value. Okay, so I'll just write it again. X will equal then the positive value, square root 233. Now, if you go and start dividing 233 by square numbers, you'll see that there is not a square number that divides into 233, and so that's where this one ends. Okay, over here. Now, one of the legs is x, and one of the legs is 7, and the hypotenuse is 9. So this sets up just a little differently. You'll have x squared, one leg, plus the other leg, 7 squared, equals 9 squared. So you can see we'll subtract here to get x squared by itself. So this will x squared plus 49 equals 81. Subtract 49. X squared is going to equal 32. Then I square root both sides. So x will equal the square root of 32. Now this one does have a square number that divides into it. If you start checking it out, you'll see that 16 is the largest square number. It divides into 32. So this is the square root of 16 times the square root of 2. And the square root of 16 is 4. So my answer then becomes 4 square root 2. 4 times the square root of 2. Okay? So we want to write it as this simplest form, unless it asks otherwise. Now, you could go back up to the instructions here. It said round each answer to the nearest tenth. So, we could type those in, and if we were looking for an actual length. So let's go back to the previous example. You can just on your calculator go the square root of 233. That is 15.3 at the nearest tenth. 4 square roots of 2, which is square root of 32. That should be 5.7. If we're gonna, if we were trying to find the actual length of, something, then you would use the decimal answer. Okay, but I'm also showing you, depending on the instructions, leaving it in simplified radical form. Okay. So here we have two triangles in this bigger triangle. These are right triangles. Now, what I notice is these markings say that both of those sides are the same, which then, if you remember from the congruent triangles business, this side is the same in both. So that means these two triangles are congruent because you have hypotenuse and leg, because it's a right triangle. Now, because those two triangles are the same, that means these two sides would be the same. And if the whole thing's 22, that means each of those would be 11. So we need that number because if you pick one of those right triangles, we'll have 11, 24, and x. So now we can set up our Pythagorean theorem. X squared plus 11 squared equals 24 squared. So x squared plus 11 squared is, 121, and 24 squared is 576. Subtract your 121, and x squared would be 455. Square root both sides to solve, and x is going to equal the square root of 455. Now, you're not going to find a square number that divides into 455, and if we do need the decimal, we'll just type it in, the square root of 455, and we get 21.3 if we're rounding to the nearest tenth. Okay, so if we leave it in simplest radical form, it would be this, and round each answer to the nearest tenth would be this. Okay, let's go here. I need to create a right triangle. So I can see this would be a right triangle. I'm going to cut it right there and say, all right, I can now made a right triangle. This side would be the same as this side, right? That would be x. This length right here is 5, x, 5x. Okay, I made a rectangle right there because I need this right triangle. Well, in the right triangle, let's draw the right triangle now. I have x, I have 16, and what is this length? Well, the whole thing is 18. So I've already have 5 there, so what's left? That's going to be what, 13? Okay, so there's my right triangle. So x, 13, and 16 is the hypotenuse. So x squared plus 13 squared equals 16 squared. X squared plus 169 equals 256. Square root or subtract the 169, x squared is going to equal 87. Square root both sides. X equals, and that does not simplify any further, a square root of 87. And if we want the decimal, then we go square root 87, 9.3. Okay. So now this one here looks to me like x is this whole length, and I have two right triangles here. So I'm going to need this piece, and I'm going to need this piece, then add them together, and that will be x. So I'm going to call this one y from there to there, and the other one z, So x will actually just be y plus z. So now I kind of have an idea of what I'm doing. So I'm going to take the smaller triangle here to the left, and I'm going to solve it. So I'm going to go y squared plus 12 squared equals 14 squared. So let's see, y squared plus 144 is going to equal 196. Subtract 144, so y squared is going to equal 52. And then if I square root both sides, y is going to equal the square root of 52. Now, if we're just going to write it in simplified radical form, then this would be the square root of 4 times the square root of 13. And so then y would equal, square root of 4 is 2, so 2 square root 13. And if we're using the decimal, what is the square root of 52? That is like 7.2, 7.21, maybe we'll just say 7.2. We'll circle them both. So now I need that, that's the y part. Now I need the z part, so I'm going to move over here and do the z part. So my numbers are z squared and 12 squared is going to equal 29 squared. 29 is the hypotenuse. So z squared plus 12 squared equals 29 squared. Okay, does everybody see where I got those numbers? Looking at that part of the triangle, just the right triangle, the right side. All right, so let's see. Z squared plus 144 is going to equal 29 squared, which is 841. And subtract 144. So 841 minus 144 is going to be 697. Square root both sides. Z is going to equal the square root of 697, which there is not a square number that divides into 697, so I'll need to do that on the calculator, and I think that comes out to be right around 26.4. So now adding those two together would be x. So x is going to equal 26.4 plus the 7.2, which is going to be, what, 33.6? And that's what we're actually looking for. All right. Now this last one, let's see if we can't get it all in there. Okay. So this one says, a roofer leaned a 16-foot ladder against a house. So if this is the house, and it leans a ladder, and that is a 16-foot ladder against the house, and there's the ground. If the base of the ladder is 5 feet from the house, so this then would be 5 feet. Okay, base of the ladder is 5 feet from the house, ground. Okay, how high up the house does the ladder reach? Oh, so how high is it? So there's my right triangle. This 16 then would be the C part, or the hypotenuse. Here are the legs. So I'll set it up. X squared plus 5 squared equals 16 squared. X squared, let's see, plus 25 equals 16 squared. Oh, is that 256? Real quick. Yes, it is. Subtract 25. So x squared is going to equal 256 minus 25. 256 minus 20. So that's 231. Now we square root both sides. X is going to equal the square root of 231. Now if we need a length, which we probably do, we'll square root 231. And we get 15 point, we'll just round it to the 10th, 15.2 feet. So we're talking about a length, so we put in the unit of measurement. All right. There is 18.1 notes. So now your assignment, okay, your part here, let me zoom out real quick. You're doing the same thing. Okay, you're going to set those up, and then you have a few story problems, okay, and off you go.